HanselMinutes.com, it's Hansel Minutes, a weekly discussion with web developer and technologist Scott Hanselman, hosted by Carl Franklin. This is Lawrence Ryan announcing show number 131, recorded live Friday, September 26, 2008. Support for Hansel Minutes is provided by Telerik RAD Controls, the most comprehensive suite of components for Windows Forms and ASP.NET web applications. Online at www.telerik.com. And by .NET Developers Journal, the world's leading .NET developer magazine. Online at www.sys-con.com. In this episode, Scott talks about VB and the early years of BASIC with Jeff Webb.
Hi, this is Scott Hanselman, and this is another episode of Hansel Minutes, and today I'm sitting down with Jeff Webb, the guy who lowercased BASIC. Jeff, thanks for sitting down with me today. I appreciate it.
Hey, Scott, no problem.
So, what do you mean you lowercased BASIC? What is this?
Well, if you think back, I don't know how many people are old enough to remember Basic A and GW Basic and all those other great acronym-based basics that we worked on at Microsoft. Those were floating around for a long time, and finally they decided to create a Windows Basic, which wound up being Visual Basic. And at that point, they had a problem with what do you do with all those letters? Do you make them all uppercase or what? And it was kind of a funny little argument to have all over the company. Everybody was doing it differently before we shipped, and I pointed out this problem. And Bill agreed with us that it should be mixed case, and so I sent the memo. The global memo. And ever since then, BASIC is initial cap, lowercase.
Now, Bill, that's Bill. BillG.
Yeah, BillG.
So when was this? What time was this, and what was the state of Microsoft at this time?
Well, actually, when I got hired back in the late 80s, we had about 3,000 employees. I actually came in with a bunch of people that wound up becoming my fishing buddies that I still fish with today. We remember the good old days, when Bill was just down the hall and you could go to him for a decision on things. Of course, that's changed a lot since then. But by the time we were working on Visual Basic, we were up to 6,000 employees. I'm going to probably remember that wrong. It was a couple of years into my career. But things were happening. I mean, Windows 3 was just about to come out, and it was a pretty exciting time.
Wow. Now, what was your role, and how many people were on the team that you were on?
Well, I got hired as an editor for what became Access later, but by the time I got off the plane coming out from New England, that project had slipped out about 5 years. So I landed on the BASIC team. Back then it was Professional Basic and QBasic and Quick Basic and all that stuff. And that was a DOS product, and I stayed there in that team the whole time. We grew over the years, probably, 10, 15 developers, probably another 10 to 15 direct support people. And I became a writer and a programming writer and wound up working on just about everything that came through that part of the team there. And we're a division of applications. A lot of people don't understand that. There were two big divisions of languages and applications. We were the only language in applications, and that's the way Bill wanted it. And it was an interesting place to be that way because we weren't as focused on maybe the super technical audience. We weren't looking at the C developers. We were much more focused on people creating business applications, and that's still the way VB is kind of today.
So C++ was in a languages division, and you were over with like Word and Excel and those guys. Right. Yeah, that's all been reorged now, I think a couple of months ago, 6 months ago now, that there's languages and everyone's all mushed together now. So the C# team and the VB team are much, much closer together these days. That's a recent thing. Yeah,
well, it's been strange because the last couple of versions of the .NET languages, VB and C# were identical, essentially. It was just a syntactic difference. Now with this new one, with 2008, there's significant differences.
VB proponents would probably disagree with you. Everyone is trying to distinguish themselves. I mean, there's some pretty cool syntactic sugar that you can do in both languages.
Yeah, I'd say now there is. I don't know if you're talking the new, I mean, depends on where you draw the line, but the first two, the 1.0, 1.1.
Yes.
Where are we at now? Are we at 3.0?
Well, there's VB9 and VB10. What is it now? VB. I think we're on VB9 and C# 3, but we call them the 2008 version.
2008, I agree.
Yeah.
That's different. But
okay, so you're talking about when .NET first came out, and it was like, welcome 1.0. Here's 2 languages. Go.
Yep. In fact, I did the ASP.NET training course for Microsoft for the certification. I did the first one and then the 1.1 for them, and they insisted that we do both languages in parallel, right? Mm-hmm. And since I'm a VB guy, I made the mistake of doing the VB first and then trying to transliterate it into C#. And I discovered very quickly that was the wrong way to do it.
Yeah.
It's much easier to go the other way.
You wrote the legendary, and it's legendary because I still have it, the Visual Basic 6.0 Developers Workshop with a couple of guys, didn't you?
With John Craig, yeah, that was his original idea, and I came on at 5.0 and wound up doing it to 6.0. Did about half of it at that point, so we're the co-authors on it. John's still around. I never met the guy, but I still talk with him irregularly.
You wrote an entire book without meeting him.
Yeah, I've written several like that.
Wow. That seems like an obvious thing now. I know lots of people who will work on things collaboratively, but it just seems like even 5 to 8 years ago that was less feasible to do something so complicated as collaborate that far away on something so complicated.
Yeah, John is a really great guy, and I like the format of the Ask John thing. We kept that when I joined the team. We kept it even though it could be Ask John or Jeff or something like that. Just keep it simple. But it's funny that you mentioned that book, but a lot of people really liked it. And I think that's a credit to John. He's just a really great guy.
Yeah, that was a great book. I actually wrote question items for the MCSD test, the certification. Mm-hmm. So I wrote the Visual Basic 6 desktop and web questions. And I remember there was a bunch of us writing pools and pools of questions with distractors, and it was at that point when I finally resolved that I did not find certifications to be a valuable thing. It was the exercise of actually.
I'm glad that you shared that with me. I always had mixed feelings about it.
It was the writing of that test, because the questions were fine, but I felt like I was on Jeopardy, It just what is add reference? It just, the whole thing was a ridiculous experience. I like the more real world certifications. They've got the architect certification now, where you go in front of a panel and explain a solution. They've got virtual machine ones and simulation ones where you actually have to do some work. But I never thought that certifications based entirely on radio buttons was the way to go.
One of my coworkers, Tony Arnowitz, recently he's always wanted to teach a programming class, and I was talking with him about it, and he says, no, it's not going to be an ordinary programming class. He said, here's what I'm going to do. First week, I'm going to give the people assignments. I'm going to give them the requirements. I'm going to have them start programming. They're going to go for about a week, and then I'm going to walk into the class on Monday and say, okay, everybody shift with the person to the right. And they're all going to have to change code and work on their neighbor's stuff. And then I'm going to wait till about halfway through the class. And then I'm going to say, okay, I'm changing the requirements.
That is a really good idea for a class.
Yeah, he was, the only thing that he was sticking on was how do you grade them? And I told him, well, you probably can just grade them on how much of the class they complete. If they get halfway through, they get a C.
Yeah, exactly. If they quit and leave.
That's an ass.
I taught C# at the local university and tried to do a similar kind of a real world thing, but I never had the idea of actually switching people in their chairs, having them inherit legacy code, and then try to continue forward and still succeed, and then change the requirement in the middle too. What a great idea!
It's just evil. It's evil. You could tell he's kind of an evil guy.
Well, but reality has a bit of an evil bias. So that's. So back to the history stuff. So Bill's down the hall. You can just stick your head over the cubicle and just wander down the hall and say, hey, you say, hey, sir, or do you say, hey, Bill, check this out?
Well, we have nice offices, man. We have cubicles.
No cubes. Okay, so everyone's got a door.
It was probably about 4 doors down from where I was sitting in building 4. And I was on the second floor at the time, and I just walked by. I was just in awe. I was just amazed. I don't think I said 2 words to him the whole time I was there.
Oh, really? So even then, there was a sense of this is going fast.
Yeah, I still think he's one of the coolest guys in the world. I mean, I idolize a few people. I idolize George Washington. I idolize Bill Gates. And
wow.
Bill's been very good to me. I mean, he made me a lot of money, so that's a cool thing. But we had this guy who came in when I was working on VB3, Drew Fletcher. He wasn't as reticent. He would go talk to Bill, and we were up at a ship party once, and he wasn't really watching what he was doing, and he cut in line in front of Bill in the food line. And then he turned around and saw him standing there. And he was like, sorry, And Bill was pretty cool about it, but he was tried to strike up a conversation. And of course, we were working on VB, so we had something to talk about. And Drew just looked at him and says, I don't understand why we don't put pointers in VB. I mean, what would be wrong with that? People really want pointers, And it's like you see Bill's face turning red because it was something he really cared about. And he said, "There'll never be pointers in VB."
I wonder what the rules are. I'm still learning my way around Microsoft. I've only been there a year. How long were you there?
I was there 5 years.
So you're there 5 years, but 5 pretty good years. Trying to figure out what the rules are as far as talking to the bosses like that. My boss is a guy named Simon, and his boss is Scott Gu, and his boss is a VP named Soma. So I just wandered into Soma's office one day and said hi and introduced myself. And he was very kind, and he shook my hand and stuff, but no idea who I am. Really not clear why this guy has come here to shake my hand and say hello. So I kind of wandered off saying, gosh, that was the right thing to do if the company had 500 people. But, the company has 80,000 and the division has 2,000 or 3,000 or whatever. Probably not the best idea for me to have just wandered up to a random VP and said, hi, I'm new. Nice to meet you.
Well, I don't know about that because right before I left, I knew Mike Maples a little bit because he was the vice president, I think, at the time, or member of the office of the president or something like that. He was an ex-IBM guy, and there was a crisis at Microsoft, and what happened was Bill had written a memo about the threat from IBM. I don't know if you remember that, but he basically wrote after the whole OS2 thing, finished up. He wrote that they're down now, but we really got to keep our eye on them because they may be an elephant, but they can turn around and move very quickly when they want to. And so it was sort of a keep yourself sharp kind of memo. And a friend of mine actually shared it with the one of the newspapers, and it came out, and the stock crashed. And I think Bill actually lost like $5 billion that day or something like that. It was one of those monumental, shifts in the stock, which we've seen over the years. And it was, it wasn't that bad of a memo, but it was not for public consumption. And so I was sitting in the lobby of Building 9 once, and Mike Maples was talking to some other exec, and they were really kind of, the other guy was kind of pissed about it because, he'd probably seen a lot of the stock drop. And Mike said, you and I have both worked for companies that, used to keep tabs on memos like that and have for your eyes only and stuff like that. And he says, I think this is better. I thought that was a pretty cool comment, Like, don't sweat it. Don't sweat the little stuff, right?
The little stuff, the little $5 billion memo. Yeah.
I thought that was a very cool. That really impressed me about Mike Maples. I thought that was, that was something that people don't know about him, and I think it's pretty cool.
Do you know how to make the possible out of the impossible? Well, the .NET ninjas at Telerik do. They just released a huge pack of web controls all built on top of ASP.NET Ajax that'll help you build impossibly fast and interactive applications in no time at all. They've made the impossible possible in desktop development. If you think you can't have a carousel component in WinForms, well, you can. Their Windows Forms suite features a super powerful grid view control and 32 other crazy desktop components that'll give you dazzling WPF-like features, but in WinForms. They do the same thing in reporting solutions with a new design surface like nothing else, looks just like graph paper, gives you advanced page layout capabilities. Makes it feel more like a graphic design software than a reporting solution. Go check them out at Telerik.com and be at .NET Ninja. And thanks for listening. There's a lot of people at Microsoft that are cool with transparency. I mean, it doesn't mean that every rank and file should be blogging about what our super secret plans for 2025 are, but it definitely, erring on the side of transparency is almost always a good thing in any situation. I mean, your parents tell you this, tell the truth and I won't be mad.
Right. Yeah, I think I agree with that, and I like working for companies like that. I just finished a gig with a defense contractor, and they definitely weren't that way.
Well, yeah, that's the government. So when you're working in a pretty small group like this, you said 10 developers, a group where you can know everyone's name. And you got Bill, down the street at reasonably accessible. Are people from on high like Bill reaching in and changing things? Are they having arguments with people in any kind of public sense? Are they? I
think they still kind of do the same thing with the project reviews. I understand they're a lot more formal now, but they would do periodic presentations to Bill or to whoever the manager, the next level manager was, and they would have to basically they had to get by Bill at that point, and they would present their product and stuff like that. And I was just actually thinking about that a lot. That's probably the main thing that's changed at Microsoft, because Bill was really a big enforcer on integration. And if you think back, one of the reasons why Windows succeeded was really simple. Cut and paste worked. You think about that now. I mean, we take that for granted, but
it worked everywhere. It was ubiquitous.
Yeah, and that was new. You can cut and paste from Word to Excel, and it'll work. And that was just cool. So he was really good about concepts like that he thought were important. And I see that now that Microsoft isn't doing so great on the product integration, and they wind up with products that actually compete with each other. And that's sort of that too big company disease, I think, a little bit. And it worries me just a little bit.
I had a similar situation when I was at a company that went from 30 people to 300, and then suddenly that kind of scrappy, we're in it together, became co-opetition. Are we cooperating? Are we competing? And then I think at Microsoft and at most big companies, there's always at least two groups. There's always like Scott, and then there's evil Scott with a goatee in another group who's doing the exact same thing, but with a different spin. And then you don't even know you exist until at one point some hole gets punched into the fabric of space-time between your little company, and you go, wait a second, you're working on a FizzBin also? Shoot. And then suddenly it becomes a FizzBin smackdown, and we both have to find out, and it gets escalated up to a boss, and the boss says, all right, there can't be two Visual Basics, or there can't be two FizzBins or whatever, so,
right.
Fight it out.
Yeah, that's a cool thing. But I mean, the great thing about being at Microsoft at that time was that there weren't those barriers to doing things. Like I don't know if you've read any of Brian Overland's books, but he was part of the VB team, and one of the main things that he did early on was he wrote the Custom Control Development Guide, the original instructions on how to write custom controls in C for Visual Basic.
VBXs. Yeah.
And that was a huge success. I mean, it was that one book, and it was a simple, I think it was a clock, little, digital, little, analog clock that you could drag into a Windows app. That was his sample. That launched 1,000 add-ins, And one guy can do something like that, and it's really, really neat. It's just, I know that he's living in Hawaii right now. I think he has a very good life, So, that, when you're at the right place at the right time, you can do some neat things.
Yeah, that launched the whole add-in, the whole VBX, OCX world, the whole idea of a third-party ecosystem. They always use that term around Microsoft when they talk about the larger community ecosystem.
Right.
people are worried about backward compatibility, not just for the devs, but they think, well, if we change this interface, is that going to mess up that grid and then crush the entire grid industry?
Yeah, well, yeah, you got to worry about that, that's for sure. But the cool thing about that for the VB product, which was really unique, was that we didn't really advertise Visual Basic all that much. It was the third parties that did all the advertising, and they had a vested interest in promoting this. And VB was actually an integration tool for them, so it was a way they could bring together their components and sell their components and develop business apps. And so if you picked up any of those VB magazines back then, there were always, tons and tons of little, quarter-page ads for some custom control or something. And it was a great environment. And now we're seeing that develop with SharePoint and web parts. And that may even propagate out to ASP.NET applications, with web parts and stuff. So the component third-party marketplace is pretty interesting right now, and it's kind of challenging. I'm just entering it now. I'm working on my essential SharePoint web parts and working with Bamboo Solutions on some things now. So it's kind of an interesting world now that we have to worry about security. Of course, that wasn't an issue back then.
Was that how it did we literally just not sweat it, or were we just completely?
Yeah, pretty much not.
I mean, Lord knows. I mean, I wonder if anyone ever went back into Windows 3X or 3.1 and threat modeled it, what they would find.
Yeah, that would be bad. It was really funny. I mean, the virus could spread by SneakerNet was about the fastest way it could get around. It was pretty loose. I remember I worked on OLE 2, COM, and I wrote the programmer's guide for what became OLE Automation, which is the way that Excel implemented programmability. And actually, it's funny that there's a huge tension, I don't know if it still exists, between the Excel people and the VB people, because VBA got a bad reputation as being a vector for viruses because there was absolutely no security.
Right. You just open up in the old days, you'd open up a file and people would just send you a Word file or an Excel file and say, check this out.
Absolutely.
And you get nailed.
I mean, that shows the level of naivete, that was going on. And a lot of people, I think, in the Office team would have rather just ripped all that out than go through the abuse they got from corporate managers. I mean, really, I know that Boeing actually blocked all macros at one point. I don't know if they still do, but you could not, run any macros at all there because they were so worried about that. And of course, it's a huge problem, right? And so what did Microsoft do? Well, they instituted the trust model for security, which I think is wonderful. It's great. Basically, you display a dialog box to a user who, of course, knows everything in the world about security, and you say, do you trust this to run?
Yeah, the last person you want to ask is my mom.
Absolutely. Let's ask your mom. What does she think?
Yeah. Which, it bothers me about all these models, whether it be the Mac that prompts you for your password or whether it's the kind of the curtain of doom in Vista that drops down and says, stop, make a decision. Here's insufficient information. Decide. It's almost like, do you remember, what was it, Sunday mornings, and it was there was a crazy old man on the news, not the McLair report, who was that old man who would point and go, Jeff Webb, what's the answer? Quickly! What was that guy's name?
I have no idea, man.
Oh, come on. Remember, it was Dana Carvey did this on Saturday Night Live. It was the McLaughlin group.
Oh, McLaughlin. Okay, yeah. Right.
And he'd be chatting about something, and it became pretty clear that he knew what he was talking about and the rest of the group did not. And then at some point he would call on you. And he would ask these obscure questions, and if you hadn't done your research, you'd be in trouble. So Dana Carvey on Saturday Night Live did a takeoff on that, and he would start asking just really out of the questions you'd have no way to answer. And he would say something like he'd have a panel, and he'd go, Jeff Webb, what did I have for breakfast? And he'd immediately, the spotlight is on you, the camera's on you, the microphone's on you, decide. That's how I feel when like when Mac or Windows pops up a dialogue and says, something horrible is about to happen. Decide, quick! You just imagine what that must feel like to my mom. I mean, seriously.
Anyway, that's one of those things. I've been dealing with code access security this week, and it's a challenge. It's really interesting trying to figure out what permissions you do need to make the code run, because they're not documented anywhere. And I mean, I worked for Microsoft as a programmer, as a writer, as a editor. And those positions don't exist anymore. They're all filled by contractors at some level. And I think they're missing the boat a little bit.
Is this something that, is it really about documentation? Is it about teaching? I mean, they don't really teach people defensive, secure programming in school. It's usually a class, I mean, there are fields like test-driven development or security or little kind of verticals within programming where the people who are the most fervent in that vertical believe that it is not a vertical, that it's the whole freaking point.
Right.
Secure code from the start.
Well, it's just very difficult to figure out definitively what permissions. It's trial and error right now, and that's an issue. And you could document it. You could actually write in the reference material what permissions a call requires. That would actually be kind of nice. Just a general suggestion there. It'd be handy to find out.
So you've moved from VB into the SharePoint world, but still a componentized place, a componentized world. Do you think that there's going to be a huge web parts ecosystem, or is there already?
There already is, yeah. And I just put together a directory, SharePointWorkshop.com. There are about, actually I can count them from there. There's over 24 vendors right now, and SharePoint right now is about for Microsoft, I think it's a $1 billion a year business, but I would guess that probably double this year. I'm just a ballpark guess.
Wow.
So the third party space is very interesting. And it's been around for a while now. WSS2, previous version, 2003, it started with like ChorusWorks and some other vendors. And now there's like ChorusWorks and Bamboo Solutions, and we're working on it, man. It could potentially be reasonably profitable for people. I think right now they're still kind of in startup mode, but it's interesting. I like it. The way I got there, though, is by way of ASP.NET. When I was working with John in that VB book, I got the web stuff. As my last name is Webb, that was kind of convenient. And I just took off from there. And so then when it became clear that ASP.NET, or ASP at the time, but later it was ASP.NET, was coming out, then Microsoft hired me to do that training guide and stuff like that. So it kind of morphed into ASP, and then that morphed into SharePoint. So it's kind of, for me, it's kind of the same track, for a long time.
This is a silly question to end on, but I think it's an interesting one. Why keep working? I mean, if you were at a good place, and you're at a good place at Microsoft, you made a little bit of money, and you were part of that first wave. Why not just hang out and drink fruity drinks with little umbrellas in them?
Well, my wife says George Bush stole half my money. I mean, that's what she would say.
Is it just as a need? Is it just a need to create?
Well, I like to say I have to work, but I just don't have to work today. That's my level of finance. I think I mentioned that to you at a party. We're okay. We're comfortable. We have a nice house, paid off and stuff. But my daughter's going to art school.
Oh, okay.
So
life marches forward. I'm just wondering, if life marches forward, expenses come up. It just seemed to me like in Office Space. The guy talks about what could he do if he didn't have a job? He said, I'd do nothing. And when he says nothing, he was being sincere. And I wonder if anyone ever did that, if anyone ever truly did nothing.
Well, it's a good thing to study with ex-Microsoft people, because a lot of us really had that option. I mean, for a while I did, and I wound up down in Sanibel doing a lot of tarpon fishing, but I was still writing books. So I would write a book a year. It takes about 3 to 6 months to write a book, and so I kept doing stuff. But my job was tarpon fishing, so I caught a lot of tarpon, and it's
really?
something I'm still very good at, and if anybody wants to hire me to go tarpon fishing, I'm available.
But you didn't go and open up a new, a tarpon fishing company. You still learned technology. You didn't say, screw computers.
No, I didn't do that. But I got a friend that started he ties flies. But we're part of the original Microsoft fly fisher. Three of us. Tim Harris, who's still at Microsoft, Jay Paulson, who has AmazingFlies.com, and of course myself. And we just came back from a trip out your way. We're fishing in the Deschutes for steelhead. It was really nice summer steelheading out there. Beautiful river. And are you in Portland?
I'm in Forest Grove. I'm a little farther west. I'm halfway between Portland and the beach. Okay. But I know exactly that my dad's on the Deschutes. I think he just got back from the Deschutes last couple weeks ago.
How do you do?
I don't care. I don't know anything about fishing or hunting. I would have to ask him. He's in the other room right now, having lunch with my son. I will ask him how he did at the Deschutes. They came over to have lunch with my son, and I said, I got to record a show. But I will make sure that the Deschutes is the place to go fishing. It is true.
It's beautiful. It is really beautiful.
Well, Jeff Webb, thank you so much for sitting down and taking time to talk to me today on Hansel Minutes.
Well, thanks, Scott. I hope you got some good stuff.
I hope so. And this has been another episode. We'll see you again next week.